You ever just stand somewhere and wonder, who owned this piece of ground before me? Who owns it now? And honestly, what does owning it even mean? It turns out that's a way bigger and more fascinating question than you might think. And the answer? Well, it's all written down in the language of law, and we're about to take a look. I mean, it seems so simple, right? You've got a deed, maybe a title in a safe somewhere, but in the eyes of the law, ownership is really just a bundle of rights. And those rights can be defined, they can be limited, and sometimes they can even be taken away by this huge, complex system of land laws. So, to find our way through this maze, we're going to use something a little unusual as our map, a university syllabus for a land law course. Yep, we're going to use it to break down the core ideas that decide who actually controls the ground right under our feet, one unit at a time. Okay, so here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with the absolute basics, the rules of ownership. Then we'll jump in a time machine to see how these laws have changed. We'll also get into when the government can step in and take land, how reforms try to make things fair, and finally, how the law works to protect the most vulnerable people.
All right, first things first, we have to get a handle on the fundamentals. Before we dive into all the complicated stuff, we need to know what the basic building blocks of land ownership actually are. So, looking at our syllabus map here, we're starting right at the very beginning with Unit I. This is where we find the foundational concepts that really everything else is built on.
At its very heart, ownership really just boils down to one key difference. You've got absolute ownership, which is the dream, right? Complete and total control. But the reality for most of us is limited ownership, where our rights have conditions, and there are two legal ideas from our syllabus that show this perfectly.
First up, there's this thing called Eminent Domain. You can kind of think of it as the government having a master key to all property. If they decide they need your land for a public purpose, say a new highway or a school, they can take it. But here's the crucial part. They have to pay you for it. So you see, your ownership isn't quite as absolute as you thought.
And then there's this other kind of weird doctrine called Escheat. Now, this is what happens when someone who owns property passes away, but they don't have a will and there are no known heirs. The land doesn't just sit there in limbo forever. Instead, it goes back to the state. It's basically the ultimate legal safety net to make sure every single piece of land always has an owner.
Okay, so those are the basic rules. But where in the world did they come from? You know, to really get a grip on the laws we have today, we've got to look back and see how they've changed over time.
Let's pull out our map again. We're moving on to Unit 2. This part of the syllabus contrasts the land systems from before and after India's independence. And believe me, understanding this history is key to understanding the laws today. So, before independence, you had these really complex systems like Zamindari, where huge landlords acted as middlemen collecting revenue for the state. But after 1947, there's this massive push to get rid of those systems and give more rights directly to the people who are actually farming the land. That whole movement led to the modern tenancy laws we have now, which are all about protecting those cultivators. It was a total shift from just collecting taxes to focusing on individual rights. And this is where we get to a really fundamental conflict in land law. Your rights as an individual versus the needs of society as a whole. So what happens when the government looks at your private land and says, we need that for a public project? To answer that question, our syllabus points us right to Unit 3. This section covers the laws on land acquisition, and it zooms in on a really important piece of legislation that came out in 2013.
Whoa, okay, that is a mouthful, I know. But trust me, every single one of those words is important. This law really changed the game. It shifted the focus from just taking land to making sure people got fair compensation, that the process was transparent, and that there was a real plan to help anyone who is displaced.
So how does it all work? Well, it's a pretty clear process. First, the government has to issue a public notification saying what they want to do. Now, this is crucial. That opens up a window for people to raise objections. Landowners can actually state their case. It's only after that step that a final declaration can be made, which is then followed by paying fair market compensation. It's a very structured system designed to try and balance what the public needs with what private citizens own. But it's not just about acquiring land. There's also this bigger question of how it's distributed in the first place. I mean, is it fair for a tiny number of people to own enormous amounts of land while so many others have none? That question is really at the core of land reform. And our map takes us straight to Unit 4, which is all about those reforms, specifically laws created to make land ownership more equitable. And what's the main tool they use to do this? Something called land ceiling acts.
The idea behind it is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. These laws basically put a cap, or a ceiling, on how much agricultural land one person or one family can legally own. Any land they have above that limit can be taken over by the government and then redistributed to landless farmers. It's a direct attempt to tackle the problem of wealth and resources being concentrated in just a few hands.
Finally, we get to a really important point. The law itself recognizes that not all landowners are in the same boat. Some communities have historically been much more vulnerable to losing their land, and so they need special, targeted protection.
And this brings us to our final stop on the syllabus map, Unit V. It focuses on something called alienation, which is just the legal term for transferring land, and all the laws that were created to stop that from happening to specific vulnerable communities, especially tribal populations.
So there are these very specific legal shields put in place. For instance, some regulations make it completely illegal to transfer land in scheduled tribal areas to anyone who isn't tribal. Other laws prevent the sale of land that was specifically assigned by the government to the landless poor. These laws are meant to act like a firewall, to keep the land within those communities.
So as we've made our way through this whole syllabus, it's become super clear that land law isn't just a dusty old set of rules. It's really a living document. It tells the story of a nation's values, how it tries to balance individual wealth with the public good, how it tries to correct injustices from the past, and how it tries to protect its most vulnerable citizens. And all of that leaves us with one final and frankly massive question. Land is the one thing they're not making any more of, right? As our populations grow and our needs change, the pressure on this finite resource is just going to get more and more intense. So how do we make sure our laws are fair, not just for us, right now, but for all the generations to come? That's definitely something to think about.